You find yourself in a dark corridor that ends in a T intersection. To the left, the hallway continues deeper into the darkness, shrouded in shadow. To the right, you see a soft white light coming from beneath the cracks of a distant doorway. Which hallway do you choose, and why? My name is Zach Dyson, this is Dungeon Master Design, and today we're talking about using light as a guide for your players in Dungeons & Dragons. Light is a very powerful tool in the Dungeon Master's tool belt, but it's one that often goes underappreciated. Just a few weeks ago, I was playing a game where we were trapped in an underground dwarven fortress, and for 3 sessions straight, we never saw the light of day. But then, we turn a corner, enter into a passage, and we see the distant shimmer of daylight. We were willing to fight a dragon, not for gold, not for magic items, but to get to that light. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to use light. It'll be a short video because while light is very powerful, it's actually very simple to implement when you're using it intentionally. Now, first, let's talk about the problem with using light in a Dungeons & Dragons game. When we're talking about light, we are inherently talking about a visual design tool, and Dungeons & Dragons is not a very visual game. Yes, you have battle maps and minis and maybe even a visual aid, but for the most part, you're relying on the theater of the mind. So how do we implement light, which is by nature visual, into a game that isn't visual? Well, the first thing that we need to understand is that our role as a dungeon master is ultimately the flow of information. It is your job as the DM to communicate vital information to your players. Often, we resort to simply telling our players the things that they need to know, telling them the lore of our world or the motivations of our NPCs. But there is a more subtle way to go about this. If you are an author or you've spent any amount of time in an English composition course or a high school creative writing class, I'm sure you've heard the phrase show, don't tell. Basically meaning that you should reveal information through the outcomes of your story rather than through simple explanation or exposition. Don't tell your reader what they need to know, show them through what's happening. And one of the best ways to do this is through the environment. The environment that we put our players in, or that an author puts the reader in, communicates vital information. It could be something as simple as showing that people use horses instead of motorcycles to travel, which gives you a good idea about the time period. Or it could be something like all the townsfolk going inside and locking their doors at 5 p.m. every day. Whether we realize it or not, the environment of a game communicates a ton of information to our players. And it's our job to use that environmental communication intentionally to communicate the things that we want the players to know, rather than accidentally telling them something that we never intended to tell them. Amelia Schatz, the lead game designer for the game company Naughty Dog, says this. She says, "Figure out what your environment is telling the player, and figure out how to give the player as much information as possible." Now, this is much easier in a visual medium like video games or movies. Like an author of a book, a DM can't rely on visuals. We have to rely on our words and descriptions. This means we have to be much more intentional about how our environment is communicating to the players. The best way to do this is to rely on tropes and archetypes and player expectations so that when we put something in front of the players, it evokes a response in them. And this is where light comes in. Humans are pre-wired somewhere deep in our psyches to respond to light. It evokes an emotional response in us, almost a visceral response in us. Especially when we're in the dark, if we see light, it will catch our attention every single time. And this deep psychological pre-wiring of humans to respond to light is so powerful that We don't even need to see light for it to evoke a response in us. We can just hear about light or have light described to us, and we will have an emotional reaction. In the intro, when I described the dark hallway or the hallway with the soft white glow, which hallway did you choose? I'm sure you chose to go down the hallway with the light at the end of it because it felt safer and more secure. Or if you chose to go down the dark hallway, you did so because you knew that it would be more dangerous, and maybe that means more fun. Either way, your decision was based on your understanding of what light means. And as a DM, if we can understand that our players will have a similar response to light, we can begin to intentionally use it to guide them where they need to be, either by showing them where safety is or telling them that there's more interesting things away from the light. Now, of course, light doesn't always mean safety. In fact, we can use light in a ton of different ways to communicate a ton of different things. What light will always do is catch the player's attention. But once you have that attention, what you do with the light will change how they feel about it. For example, a soft white glow coming from beneath the door may feel like safety and security. But what if that glow was a deep red? Then we might be cautious about what lies behind that door. Or maybe it's a sickly green light telling us that there's something unnatural behind the door. Light can be used to communicate all types of things, all based on these archetypes and preconceived expectations of our players. And the cool thing is, it's not just light that does this. Humans have all kinds of preconceived notions about things that when we see them, they will evoke a response in us. The sound of running water, or the feeling of suddenly cold air, or the smell of a bed of roses. All of these things give us an expectation about what's coming next. So, while it is sometimes a good idea to be subtle in your environmental design and to be creative in the elements that you describe, if you want your players to know exactly what to expect, using these archetypes and psychological wirings of the human brain can be very helpful in tapping into our preconceived notions. Now, you're probably doing these things already, whether accidentally or subconsciously, but if we can learn to do these things intentionally and with great purpose, we'll be able to guide our players and show them where to go so that they'll always know what they're doing and why they're doing it. But they'll never feel like you're holding their hand or forcing them down railroad tracks. They'll simply feel like they have the appropriate information to make good choices with meaningful results. So, how do you guide your players? Do you use light? Do you use something else? How successful are you in telling your players where they need to go? Let me know down in the comments the things that you use, and maybe I can learn from you. But until then, my name is Zach Dyson. This is Dungeon Master Design, and thanks for watching.